Hello and welcome to the Mariner with me, Chris Stanmore-Major. For those of you listening on the podcast, this will be absolutely normal. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, hey, you can see me. It's happening. So something's changing, and obviously we're living in strange times at the moment. We're self-isolating here in Nova Scotia, but the bag's packed. But we have to continue on, right? So what are we going to do? I just was asking Google for something completely benign, and it ended up giving me a quote from Martin Luther. He said, if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree today. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with the algorithm with Google, but it seems to be coming up with motivational words for us all. So I'm planting an apple tree, and if we can record easily the voice, then we can record easily the image, and we can share knowledge, share information. I see a lot of that going on at the moment. Super awesome. And I'm most comfortable when I'm on a boat with a camera showing you what's going on around me. I can't go to the boatyard right now and get the boat, so we'll just have to do it like this. So I'm going to continue on with the podcast in the way that we were aiming anyway, which is me going into the Southern Ocean proper, having come out of New Zealand. See, if you've been following the podcast up to now, I've set off around the world in the Velux 5 Oceans race. This is about 9 years ago, and I had already sailed around the world as a skipper for the Clipper race. I already had 100,000 miles under my belt, but suddenly I'd got the opportunity to take an open 60, and that is a very different beast. And there's one of these podcasts called Taming the Beast, I think is at number 4. I'm talking through exactly what is the difference with an open 60, and it's the difference between getting in a NASCAR or driving to the supermarket. Most of sailing is driving to the supermarket, and then some of it's go-karting and some of it's NASCAR. And open 60s, when the throttles are wide open, that's NASCAR. So as I came into New Zealand, I had been the 4th out of 5 on the first leg, the 4th out of 5 on the second leg, and now unfortunately at this point in the race, Christoph Bullens, who had been a fantastic competitor but had just faced too many uphill struggles with the boat he had, the boat that had been dismasted, that new boat that he got, then not being able to really live up to its advertising and take him through the Southern Ocean from Cape Town to New Zealand. As I got into New Zealand, I was the last person in, but I was still 4th of 5. So it had not been the most awesome event, and obviously, you know, it's great learning to sail and develop skills, but it's not super awesome when you're doing it with a lot of media on you and a lot of people with a lot more skills watching you, and you failing terribly. So as I left New Zealand, I knew I had to pull something out of the bag. I had to make this into something other than me being tail end Charlie sailing around the world. So I think 2 things happened which really changed my perspective. The first was that Brad Van Loo had been a great friend to me all the way through the race to this point. He knew a lot about open 60 racing, to put it absolutely mildly. He had already won a solo around the world race in an open 50. He's now in a 60. He's going super hard, super fast, winning both legs so far. But one of his preparateurs, one of the people that prepped the boat for him, JC, was very experienced with exactly the kind of boat that I had, one of these boats with the deck spreaders that stick out on either side. So the deck spreaders come out from the deck like this, and then go straight up to the mast with no spreaders on them. They have a very particular way that you sail them. And I think there were 5 hulls built the same from Fino Kong, who built the boat that I had, and he had worked with one of the others with Mike Golding. So he knew a lot about these boats, and we were at a party, and he was telling me like some detail of how to sheet on the sails and how to get the headsail set up and the closing the top of the main, all this kind of stuff. And I started thinking, yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, I know how to do that. Yeah. And I thought, actually, I know exactly what he's talking about. And he's given me a masterclass, and I feel like I know the things he's coming to. Always there's more to learn, of course, but I thought, I know kind of what's going on here. And Brad had given me loads of input and would give me loads of Yoda type tips, but I could tell almost by that point that he was starting to like, hey, you know, let's not give this guy too much information, as you know, it might be more difficult to be at the front. But that was one thing. I thought, okay, I'm on this. I know what they're talking about. I know roughly what they're aiming at, what they're kind of tweaks and tips are. And then the next thing was I went to see David Adams, who was the race director. I had huge admiration for David Adams. I don't know the details of the ins and outs. I didn't watch the race go round, but I understand that the race that David Adams did, I think, was it the 2000? Was it the 2000 race, or was it the 1998 race? I think it was the 1998 race. Yeah, 2000. Ooh. There you go. So we should do some fact checking there. I can put something down here and tell you which year it was. But the year that David Adams was in, he was racing against Giovanni Soldini, who's a legend of offshore racing, Italian, just master. And I understand he had a boat which on paper was slower. But the thing about David Adams is he just has giant balls. There's just no two ways about it. And what he had done is basically just run, because it's done in sprints, that race. Yeah, you're sprinting from port to port, so you can run things really hard, much harder than you would do in the Vendée Globe. And then as you get into port, you can get all new stuff, fix stuff, and deal with it. Right? In that way, it's like the Volvo. You know, that was the thing that was lost when we lost the BOC and then the Velux. That race, that lineage. You lost a solo race that was really hard sprinting, and I think that's a great pity. But what David Adams was doing, he was just basically putting up spinnakers and then just run them until, as they say, you put it up and God brings it down. I'm not a religious person, but I get the feeling. It's like you put it up and then just your general rule is that's not coming down unless it brings itself down. And he had ended up winning the event, but he'd done it by out sprinting Giovanni Soldini in a faster boat. So I thought this was a good person to go and talk to and cut to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter was, why am I so slow? There's just no two ways about it. Why am I so slow? And he said this. He said, Chris, you're a brilliant seaman. I've got so much respect for what you've done with the boat, getting it ready in such a short period of time. I know that you're literally sailing it as you're going, you're curing problems as you go, and I've got full respect for that, but you're no kind of racer. Right? Oh, I guess I wasn't really too surprised to hear that, as I'd been 4th out of 5 twice, but sometimes, these hard hits that are going to help you, they hurt at the time. And I thought, how can they be so far ahead? Like, what are they doing that's so different from what I'm doing? Like, I've listened to JC giving, advice on how to sail the boat. I'm doing that. And he said this, he said, you've got to have so much sail area up, so much cloth in the air all the time that you are permanently petrified. And if that's how you're sailing, then you're competitive. Oh, great. Okay. So I've spent all of my sailing career up until now, even, I've got to say, even including the Clipper race, trying to reduce the actual risk. Like, I worked for Outward Bound for years, right? And what we would do there, we're trying to create a personal development experience, an environment where people can, learn things about themselves. They pick up the hard skill, they're exploring, they're adventuring, but ultimately you can't have people so far out of their comfort zone that they're actually, in a point of fear. You want to be in a learning zone, not in a fear zone. So I guess what I'd done is I developed a fear of sailing. Well, maybe I developed a style of sailing which was very conservative, and he brought that to one point in time. Like, you will never ever be at the front if you keep sailing like that. So, like, oh, okay, right. So, what to do next? And he didn't have anything else to say, and that's the thing. I guess. That's what I loved about that family that built up around that race, is that there was hints and tips for me. There was friendship for everyone. There was help for me to other people in fixing things and sharing things. My friend Magic, that we've been racing on Sailing Poland with recently, he and I got to know each other because we were sharing equipment to his team, to Gutek's team, when they had issues with their electronics in New Zealand. There was everything going every which way. But for me, with my skill level being low, there was hints and tips. But never like the 101. And that's one thing I think that afterwards really got me to consider starting Spartan Ocean Racing and Training, the company which we have, which takes people out on the Open 60, on the Whitbread 60. We've been out on a Volvo 65 recently. We've got plans to go out on the Volvo 70, because there's no other way of learning this stuff. There is no way that you can do this unless you know a guy who knows a guy, or unless somehow you've been involved in some campaign and you've developed skills and now you're invited on board, there's no way to go on these boats. And there's certainly not anywhere that you can go that's going to teach you stuff. There's no book like how to sail an open 60. Like, that doesn't exist. Like, just like there's no how to drive a NASCAR book, but you could go to a NASCAR school. What I was trying to do is start an Open 60, Volvo 60 Whitbread school, which of course we'll come back to. We've now got the Ocean Globe race coming up, which is going to mean that suddenly I have the opportunity to work with a group of people and train and learn from them and teach them and get to the point where we actually go around the world. So pretty excited about that. But to get back to the the plot here, I had these hints and tips, but I had no details. So I set off from New Zealand, and I got to say, the initial... like, I basically, every time I thought, like, I'm totally on top of this, I would then cock it up. Like, I had this guy come on board. I forget his name now. He's a friend of Alan Naybauer's, who's another great mentor of mine. And he said, going into the start line, he was on board to help me, like, you know, get set up and get things. He said you should have 4 reefs in going into the start line. And so it was very, very windy, but these are open 60s. I was like, oh, you know, okay, well, maybe, yeah, sure, we'll do that. Took the advice. Don't want to be in a position where I'm the newbie and telling much more experienced people, like, no, you're wrong. But went into the start line with 4 reefs in, and everybody else has got 3 reefs in, and then right off the start, we've got me behind again. But the good thing is the boat I had, Spartan, had incredible ability to catch up if you could catch the right angle. And the thing which did characterize my race around the world was the fact that because we'd only had 8 weeks to get ready, because I only had the sails which basically came with the boat, plus we bought a new mainsail. It was the only sail we could afford. My spinnakers were, now let me get this absolutely right. My spinnakers in 2010 were from 1998. And I know this because it had London 2000, I think. Was it Olympics in 2000? Yeah, it was in Sydney, wasn't it? But this was branding which had been done in 1998 on this sail for the what's it called, the bid for London going and getting the Olympics in 2000. So the spinnakers were 12 years old at this point, nearly 13. The head sails had already been around the world once and then had been in storage and kind of on the boat for 4 years. And we had a new main made from Dacron Dyneema, which was good, but is not like the most hardy thing. So, and I didn't have a code 0. So we had this terrible problem where basically the polars I had for the boat, I discussed this in the last one, did not completely cover exactly what was going on with the boat. Because I had sails, I had different sails. I didn't have what the polars were thinking. I, had something else. I had the ability to go very fast with that boat when I was on the exact angle where I had the sails for that for that angle, and everything else was a compromise. And the other thing was that the Raymarine equipment, I was sponsored by Raymarine for this event, and they were just awesome. I have to say, like, oh, I got a text message from someone. No, it was Instagram. Who people have started sending me questions and things now. This is from Pat Brady 205. Hello, Pat. And he says he doesn't mind. The way you go off on tangents is perfect for me. Just as mine starts to wander, so does yours. So I'm not going to apologise if I go off on tangents. We're not a machine, clearly. But the issue I was getting into with the Raymarine stuff, like, I'd like to say Raymarine were awesome, and one of the best experiences of the campaign was, like, on the Monday, I go back into the offices and I've agreed to do this thing, and Sir Robin, we do the paperwork, and he's got as much support as he possibly could have for me. It was brilliant. And he says, I'm going to put you in contact with Raymarine, and they'll be able to help you. Now, where we were in Gosport in the UK, down in the south, Raymarine's place is literally, I think it's Leon Solent, just around the corner. So you can go literally to the head offices of Raymarine and go and talk to them directly. And I did, and went in to see the head of international communication. And she was completely and utterly awesome. It was one of the best moments. It was the first day, I think, of all of this thing of going around the world. And my head is spinning with the fact that I've just got back from sailing around the world. I've got to get this boat ready. As I'm doing this, as I'm going to Raymarine, let me tell you what was happening with the boat. We took a halyard from the top of the mast. We put it onto the deck of my clipper around the world boat, Qingdao, and then we ground it on the halyard and we tipped the open 60 on its side. And as I was going to Raymarine, people were in dinghies with big scrapers scraping. I'm going to drop the coffee. They were scraping the bottom of the boat. That's the kind of condition it was in, you know. So I go down, drive down to Raymarine, go in, see them. I've got my little, you know, we'd had a set of paperwork for wanting to get round the world sponsorship, but the fact of the matter was it wasn't awesome. Now I look back on it, but I've got this little, you know, PDF or whatever, PowerPoint slides, paperwork going, yeah, okay, I'm going to go around the world and doing this thing, doing the Velux Five Oceans race. And the lady, I can't remember her name now. Oh, she was so wonderful. Again, hey, this is great because this is going to be, for those who are listening to the podcast, we'll just have to work it out later on. But for on YouTube, we can just put it down underneath where I'm speaking, right? But she said, yeah, okay, I can see where you're going with this. Yeah, I can see that, you know, the potential here, and Raymarine would like to support you. And yeah, I think we can do that. And we're like sitting in the cafeteria of Raymarine, like, okay, cool. What does that mean? She's like, well, just go down to the service department and tell them everything you need. They'll give it to you. Like, oh, okay, right. So get down to the service department. I tell them what I think I need. And then the guys down there for whom it's just boxes on a shelf, they're like, well, you probably need 2 of those. And then you'll need this cable and you need this other thing. And lo and behold, they just literally stacked up this stuff. I took half with me and the other half they brought down. And then they came and actually fitted it all and did everything else. So Raymarine were amazing. And it was at the point where Fleer had bought them. So they were doing all of the PCBs and stuff inside. I think Raymarine before had always been like a poor man's version of going to sea. And once Fleer got involved, Raymarine like went to a totally different place. And I've got to tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that stuff went all the way around the world and it was absolutely brilliant. But it had one key weakness, which is, I've described previously, the mast on that boat was a rotating wing mast. So it meant that you needed to have a wind sensor at the top of the mast, which was coordinated with a mast angle sensor at the bottom of the mast, and then you had to have a set of brains in the true wind calculation area of the brains of the thing that was then going to coordinate both the wind angle at the top of the mast and the mast angle relative to the boat, and then give you a number. And the Raymarine stuff couldn't do that, and that meant that all the way around the world I could sail by the apparent wind, basically by, I would look up through the windows. And then I would get to the setup screen on the Raymarine stuff, and I would look up at the little sensor at the top of the rig, like the wind X, and I would then set the apparent wind angle, beep, 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 offset until it looked about right, and then the boat would sail along like that. So me going and being competitive in this boat, it's not just about my lack of skill in this. The issue is also that there were some physical issues with the boat, which were definitely slowing me down. So anyway, right, so back to New Zealand. You okay, Pat? You kept up with me there? So I leave, and I've got this in my head, like, well, you just need to have so much sail area up that you're permanently petrified. So, okay. So I'd had a repair done on the trinquet, that's the smaller headsail, like the staysail essentially on the front of the boat, leaving just before I left New Zealand. And lo and behold, god damn it, the first day literally out, this thing rips. So I have to go up the rig, which is a big deal on those boats. If we haven't talked about this, have we? So if you need to go up the mast on an open 60 at sea when you're solo, you have to go up there on your own. Obviously not just shinning up the mast. There's no one to grind you up. I've tried a number of different techniques. I've got 2 down now that I'm happy with. If it's like an emergency, like the end of the world emergency, or if I'm in port, I use a system which I saw riggers using in California, actually, I think. Pardon me. And they, what they do is they have like 2 fiddle blocks, so blocks with two pieces in, top and bottom, and you create like a falls, like a gun tackle. So it goes round and round and round and then down to you. What you do is you hoist this all the way up the mast with a halyard, like obviously lashed, secured, doubled, everything, up it goes. And then it's got 4 falls in it, and one of them comes out to you, and then the other end is attached to you. So you've got like basically a block and tackle, a pulley system, which is going to you can pull yourself up the mast. So you can pull. It's very easy. It's 4-to-1. There's a lot of rope involved. It's 400 feet of rope, I think it is. But you can pull yourself up and you can go really fast. There's a couple downsides. And I actually learned the downside of it not that long ago when I was bringing Falcon back from the UK. And I don't think I mentioned this before, but I was in Falmouth and I put myself up the rig using this method to do something or other. And it was a really heavy rain. It was raining, but it became very heavy when I was up the mast. And I'm pull, totally happy, no problem at all. Got myself to the top of the rig. But remember that this line, it's got 4 falls in it, and I'm pulling one of them and shortening everything off. So now it's a 100-foot mast. Now it's 400 feet of line, or 300 feet on the deck, and me at the top of the mast, and 100 feet between me and the deck, right? There's a lot of rope. Now, directly below the mast is the dagger boards. And having never had the problem, 99 times, it's always been fine. Just chuck the rope down, right? I'm in port, it's not moving around. Well, this time, not so good. I threw it down and not looking, being too casual, it cast a hitch over the dagger board. And as I come to, all done up here, feeling very very happy with myself, I start to ease down and I can't go down because the rope is stuck down below and there's nobody around. It's like 11 o'clock at night, of course it is. And the only people that are out are the Falmouth RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. And they're like circling, doing some kind of maneuver in the Marina Harbour area where we are right now. I was at, is it Challenger Key, is it called, or Endeavour? Challenger Key, I think it's called. And I can see them looking up at me, and I keep my head touched on. I keep looking like, I know what I'm doing, and everything's fine. Jesus, how am I going to get out of this one? Like, this is not good at all. So I'm going to have to disconnect myself from this and then get down the rope somehow. So what I do is I manage to kind of jog and pull enough of the line that goes from me to the deck, which is then the what should have been the control line that I'm going to let back through the system. I have a figure of 8 with me, not completely stupid. And is that correct? Oh no, I am completely stupid, because what I actually did is I created an Italian friction hitch, a Munter hitch, onto a carabiner. So it's a little hitch that you cast onto the carabiner to give yourself friction in an emergency situation. I managed to get that onto a carabiner. So I'm now attached at the top of the rig and I can't get down, but I do have a carabiner which is attached to this line which goes from top to bottom. Remember, when the blocks are block and block, when they're chock-a-block at the top of the mast, it's basically a solid fixing at the top of the mast, and the bottom is under tension, but there's a little bit of slack. Well, the bottom is secured and stuck, but there is a little bit of slack in the line, enough to operate the Italian hitch. So I then transfer my harness connection from my block and tackle clever rigging system and connect onto the carabiner, and then let myself down the rig that way. But what you're meant to do is you're meant to use like a Jumaring system, which is, Jumars are a kind of a sender used primarily in caving, as far as I know. And they as a unit that allows you to go up the rope, but then when you put downwards pressure on it, it locks off on the rope. So you have one attached to your chest, and then you have another one which is attached to a unit which is a little bit lower down on the rope. One's here on your chest, it kind of ends up being right here. The other one's in front of you here, but your feet are attached to this one. So there's just 2 strops that go down, your feet are in this one. So what you can do is stand on your feet, put your weight on this one, and then slide this one up by your hand, and then sit on your harness that hangs from this one, and then lift your feet up, and this one comes up. So you can very slowly ascend a line. But literally, to get up an open 60 rig would take you between 10 and 15 minutes if you're not getting thrown around too much. With the rig that I had, it doesn't have any spreaders at all, so there's literally nothing to hold on to apart from like being like a koala bear, just like holding onto the rig as you're going up. So to stop you flying off, you have a line which you have pulled up, which is your Jumaring line, which you have secured at the top of the rig. Then you have another halyard which you've got a quick draw and you're clipping onto that. And then what I do is I have my belt and I don't really have I've got all sorts of harnesses. I've always got this on with every time I'm at sea, so we'll go through this later on, but there's all sorts of things in here. Torch, multi-tool, my knife, which we'll be talking about later on. There's some interesting things to be chatted about there. But it always has this on, and this was originally the kind of thing you had on tool ships. This is what I came up with, and this would attach you to the rig. Oh, gotta be careful now. Podcast. So I'm showing my belt, which is basically a canvas. I think it's a bit more than that, but a webbing style belt with a D-ring at the front, which my a strop is connected to, which is a tether off a life jacket, one of those extendy spin lock clips. And then I've got my it's got a little capsizing square buckle at the front, like a life jacket might have, and then my knife, my multi-tool, and my torch light. So I've always got that on me when I'm on the boat. Life jackets when you're on your own and you're away from the shore are less important because, of course, if you go in the water, no one's going to come back and save you. So you must remain connected to the boat, and in any situation on a boat, you must remain connected to the boat. But what I do then is I'm going up the rig is I take that extra clip, and anything that's nearby or anything that's kind of, if I'm going past a piece of rigging, if I have to stop, I can clip even onto one of the sliders on the mainsail, and you can get up there. But it takes a lot of time, and if you're being thrown around a lot by the ocean, it can be extremely difficult. So I managed to come off the racing line. Now we go back to what we were talking about, which is leaving New Zealand. Came off the racing line, went up the rig, and the way that those sails work, you're not pulling the sails up on a halyard and then up and down easily by releasing a halyard in the cockpit. What you've got is the fact that you need to go up the mast, and then the sail is lashed onto the furler at the top, and it's lashed onto the furler at the bottom. And if you want to remove it from the boat, you need to go up the rig, cut the lashing, or have a halyard attached to it now, cut the lashing, lower it down with the halyard, work on it, pull it back up with the halyard, relash it at the top, disconnect the halyard. They're not intended for any kind of reefing methods. They're just you unfurl them and furl them, and there's nothing in between. You're never like half open, half closed. So I go up, I get this trinquet down, I bring it onto the deck, I'm fixing the sail. I've got a rip that's maybe, a foot long, something like that. And then I have to wait a day to get out of some rough weather to then go back up the rig, put the trinquet back on. So again, I'm behind, and I keep listening to this thing repeating in my head of Dave Adams saying, you got to have so much sail area up that you're permanently petrified. So we set off into the Pacific, and coming out of New Zealand, it was one of the only times where there were very few ice limit marks in the course. The course was designed so that you could dive towards Cape Horn. Cape Horn is, I think, 56.5 degrees south. It's pretty far south. So you're looking at going south, but you're obviously looking at those big weather systems. We talked about this in the last one, the big weather systems rolling in from the west, rolling in, rolling over you, and you're having to modulate how much wind you're getting by modulating how far south you are. As they come in, the winds are rotating clockwise. The wind's coming in from the west. If you go further south, you're closer to the center, higher wind speed. If you stay further to the north, less wind speed. So you're coming out of New Zealand, you're slowly going south and east, obviously, towards the Horn, and then watching for these systems coming in. So everybody else was pretty far ahead of me. But one aspect of the race which had not yielded any benefits for me at all at this point, but I suddenly set my gaze on, was the fact that we had speed gates. And the speed gates, I've done this in the Clipper race, I've done it in the Velux race. The race organizers will pick a point about 10 degrees apart, like 600 miles apart, which for one of those boats could be, a day and a half, or even, well, it could be a day and a half or less. Some of the new boats are now starting to push above 500 miles in a day when they're really cooking. So a day and a bit. But certainly for me and where I was at, like 2 days. So you pick 2 lines of longitude, and as you go into that area, they time how long it takes you to get out that area. So even though I was behind, potentially if I was very fast through the gate, I could pick up some points, and those points added up to the overall score. So Brad had been very quick going in there. Gutek was quick. Derek was quick. And for me going in, I was, a little bit behind, not huge amounts behind, but I was a little behind. It hadn't slowed me massively. The trinquet, as I'd been repairing it, I had the Solent up, so it wasn't the end of the world. But I had to put a few wiggles in my course that the others didn't. But as we came towards the speed gate, I realized, here's an opportunity to fly. So I thought, okay, how do you put up more sail area than you ever think is safe? Well, you put it up. That's what you do. You put up way more sail area than you think you should have. And I think in the last one, I talked a little bit about the fact that I was still getting to grips with the fact that I didn't know properly how to reef. And I had asked Brad Van Loo a few times about this, like, what am I doing wrong? Because I would end up like zooming along, and then suddenly the boat would like wipe out. Basically, the autopilot would lose control. The boat would end up on its side with the main, still pretty hard on, not necessarily crash tacked or crash jibe, but just where the sails, where it should have been like reaching, it's now on its side, blowing dead down when with all the sails in tight and leaning way over on its side. And I'd said, do I need to reef? And he's like, no, the problem's not reefing. So you're like, okay, thanks, Yoda. So what's the problem? He's like, well, maybe it's something else. Like, okay, useful. So what is it? And one time when he'd had a couple beers, he said it's something electronic. I was like, oh, okay, so it must be the autopilot. So what I twigged very quickly was that you could have a huge amount of sail area up, but if that autopilot, the corridor that the autopilot goes down is something you can set, you've got the gain, which is how much rudder it's going to put on to correct, but you also have the width of the avenue that it'll allow it to sail down. So will it allow it 3 degrees off course? Will it allow it 5 degrees off course, 7, 10? If you allow it to be 10 degree Y avenue, well, then you're going to use a lot less power because it's going to be slowly making its way down this avenue, putting on helm when it needs to, but it's kind of just going in the right direction. The problem is when you have got a really powerful boat at speed and you've got spinnakers up, whatever, they're very, very susceptible to apparent wind angle changes and acceleration changes. And if you have the autopilot too far off course, it will wipe out. So on this leg, at some point around now, I realized like, I got to get the autopilot. I got to really tighten down the avenue so it's only like the little lane away, sorry, that it goes down. So it's only 3 degrees wide. And if we haven't worked that out, we are literally sailing 95% of the time under autopilot when we do these races. People often ask me that. There was a time way back when virtually anybody could sail faster than autopilot. When you had flux gate compasses and that little unit that used to auto tiller that would be sitting in the cockpit, and or it'd be just little belt and driving the wheel on your CNC or your westerly. Yeah, you could drive faster than autopilot, no problem. That's 20 years ago. Once they got gyro compasses in, once the algorithms were more adapted to particular boats, now it knows it's a sailboat, not a motorboat. Now it knows it's a boat that cruises at 8 knots or it cruises at 16 knots, and it's now got the ability to work out what's full rudder on both sides, what's center rudder, how much rudder can it leave on when you're sailing. So as a helmsman would do, you leave a little bit of rudder on. Back in the day, they had to keep putting rudder on and taking it off, putting rudder on and taking it off. Now they can just leave a little bit on. Like, it's getting way, way, way better. There are a couple of situations when you've got weird cross seas and you've got fluky winds, or you've got a sail that's particularly finicky, or the fact that obviously a full crew, you've got the crew trimming like mad, the helm is keeping the course, and the crew are accounting for the apparent wind angle changes. Okay, that's faster. But if you're talking about a boat where there's very few people on deck, or they don't have the skill level to trim like that, or the physicality to trim like that, you cannot drive faster. I don't really mind what your situation is. You can't drive faster than the new autopilot. So for me, I was getting happier with the fact that I had real performance out of the autopilot, but I was still not yet at a point where I really trusted it to drive at full tilt. So what I was doing is, rather than pushing the boat as fast as it possibly could go, I was all the time backing off. So this is the point where I suddenly breached that limit and just, okay, let's go faster. And now I know how to keep it on track. So reefing had been an issue because that big square top mainsail, now we've got very big seas and we're leaping from the top of waves. You know, you're coming off the top of the wave, and very regularly the front half of the boat is out the water. Very regularly 2/3 of the boat is out the water, and then it plunges its nose in, and you have to find that balance between where it's going to just drive into the next wave and then just pitch pole up onto its end. Not pitch pole all the way over, but certainly pitch, shall we say, up and then slam back down and go again. So as we came to this gate, this line between two longitudes, or this expanse between two longitudes where we had to go as fast as we could, I thought, sod it, here we go. So the Code 5 had been a great friend. It was a good angle for it, and I just let it rip. And I was going good. I was going really good. And it was whether my time was going to beat Brad Van Loo's, who at that point was holding the points for going through the gate fastest. whether I was going to be second or whether I was going to be first. It was going that good. And then the thing which really characterizes my Southern Ocean experience on the Velux, the thing that I remember most is what happened as I was just getting to the end of that gate. It ended up being that as this happens, I was at Point Nemo. So for those on the podcast, I can describe it. For those on YouTube, I'll show a little picture here. But Point Nemo is the point halfway between New Zealand and South America where you are as far away from everything as you can possibly get, all right? So you're 2,500 miles from anything, which means that once you're there, it's the most remote place you can be on the planet. Antarctica is closer to things. In space is closer. Going to the moon would be the only way of getting further away from human beings. Now, there might be a couple of people in a ship somewhere. There might be a couple of people in an Antarctic research base or something. But in terms of somewhere that anybody's actually likely to go on a merchant ship or on a military ship or on a crazy race like this, Point Nemo is as far as you can get from anywhere. And of course, where does this problem I'm about to describe happen? It happens there. I wrote about this in the book I wrote, which you never published. Maybe we'll come back to that another time. And I was thinking about like reading it. I don't know, maybe there's something to be taken from that. I hope so. There's difficult times now, actually. That's a good point. Like the book is actually about biting off more than you can chew and then chewing really hard. It's about facing adversity and making your way through it, like little step by little step. So maybe it is time to unpack that. But anyway, I talk about this situation in the book, and without putting too fine a point on it, I got a good result. Like I didn't die, but I got to tell you, it was the hardest thing I had to do. It was the hardest physical thing I had to do, and it's the closest I came to breaking on this. I had physically ended up in the bilges crying my eyes out on that first leg, just from the emotional burnout from everything that was going on in my life. But emotions aside, nothing coming from the outside in terms of the event itself actually giving me hardship. This was the moment where it all started to go wrong. So I'm blasting east and south towards Cape Horn. I'm as far away from human beings as it's possible to get. I'm getting to grips with my boat, but as I've described, you can tell, I didn't have it all stitched together. I've had to go up the rig and fix sails. I'm just getting the autopilot worked out. I'm trying hard to be this different kind of sailor. And I get myself into a squall system one night. So squalls, when they come in, we don't really use the radar that much. Let's qualify that. The radar is very, very useful in low visibility conditions where it is difficult for you to perceive what's going on with your eyes around you. And certainly if you're in an area where there's like unlit rocks or breakwaters or smaller vessels that may not be lit properly, radar's your thing. But if you're in the Southern Ocean and you're the only thing you're possibly going to see is another commercial ship, the fact that the likelihood of them not having lights on is almost zero. So the radar comes on for a different usage, which is the fact that you can see squalls. So your microwave at home and a radar are basically the same piece of equipment. It is a 3000 gigahertz magnetron, which is pumping out a signal inside your microwave. It's pumping it towards the food. It's essentially a sound wave. It's vibrating the molecules of the water in your food, and it's heating it up. The radar is pumping it out into the space around you and looking for a return signal so you can perceive far off solid items. But what it does, it works very good at picking up water. It is blocked by, it vibrates water molecules. So if you're in an aircraft, your weather radar would be a X-band 3000 gigahertz radar, which is the same as I've got on the boat. What big ships will have is they'll have an S-band radar, which is a higher frequency, which then does not get disrupted by water droplets, so they can see into squalls and they can see through fog and fog banks and moisture laden environments, and they can see ships. But then they use their X-band radar as well, and they can see the weather, see the ship, they overlay the two over them. But for us, if a ship's in a rain squall, we can't see it. We just see the rain squall. But I can see the squall. So what you do is you turn on your radar, and then you can start to see like what's around you, where it is there pockets where it may not be, how long is it going to last, that kind of thing. So I'm in the squall system. The boat's doing 20, 25 knots. The wind is probably 30, 35 knots, but remember that is then only giving me an apparent wind on deck of 10, 15, 20 knots maybe, right? So it's all completely under control. It's not an issue. It's just these crazy numbers of like, I was blowing 35 knots and I'm doing 25 knots start to become normal, right? But then it started to pump up, and I've got I think I had first reef in at this point, first reef and Solent, and I'm charging full ballast, full keel canted, a daggerboard down probably, howling through the night, enjoying the ride, lots of coffee, at that time lots of cigarettes, lots of Haribo. I'm now in a dry suit, which I've been wearing already for 10, 15 days, just to paint the picture. And I always drive around with all my deck lights on. It's good, I think, for the soul, that you have light. Certainly with new modern head torches with the LED lights, they're very, very like blue white. It's very harsh. The deck lights on our boats, I always make sure if it's LED, it's got a nice soft, is it 5700K light signature, like nice, like this Tiffany light behind me, like nice gentle light. And also the fact is that we have nav lights, but they are on a 100-foot high stick, and it is possible to miss them. More lights on, particularly lights that are lighting up the sails, is better. So I'm driving along with this like theatre going on around me of all these waves and wind and goodness knows what is going on around me, and the boat rocketing, say, through the night. But the wind starts building. We're getting through towards dawn, and I look at the radar and I look at and see the squall, like it's a lot thicker, it's a lot heavier. There's obviously a lot more moisture, and where you've got moisture precipitating out of from a gaseous state, you've got a release of energy. So you can guess, not that it's a firm fact, but you can guess if there's a lot more rain in the back of a squall, it's possible that the back wall of the squall is a lot stronger. And it has been my experience with squalls that they often will ramp up towards the end of the squall, the end of it passing over you or you passing through it, whichever kind of boat you've got, whatever kind of speed you're capable of. For open 60s, we're driving out the front of stuff, so I'm driving into the back of the squall, and I see, okay, it's getting stronger and stronger, and then like the true wind speed's at like 40, 42. I'm like, I gotta put another reef in. This is insane. Like the boat's now touching 29, 20, 29.5, 30 knots. So, and the front is coming off the waves and burying right into the next wave and shoveling up a load of water, and it all goes super dark inside, and then it clears and you're water in the cockpit, and you can imagine, right? So, and this is obviously thousands of miles from anyone, anywhere. So I'm already like on tenterhooks. I've been going as fast as I could already for 24 hours. I'm coming towards the end of the gate. It's still maybe 10 hours away. I've got to get through the squall, got to keep going, got to get some points. Don't be the last man. Don't break the boat. And what happens is I start putting this reef in, and the sail, or you reef with these boats, like any boat, first of all you have to do is you've got to release the halyard. You've got to release the main sheet, you've got to release the vang. This is not 101, but you've got to get a number of things going. But you get the main sail starting to come down, the main halyard starting to release. You're starting to collect the front of the sail. You're starting to get the tack strop reset for whichever reef I was going then to second reef. Starting to get the halyard tension. But when you're on your own, you can just focus on the front of the sail. You must leave the back of the sail completely loose, because if you start to put tension in there before the tack's set, then you're going to start creating a loose 3-point parachute, and what it's going to do is it start to look for bits that it can break to try and release pressure, and it's going to start breaking off the sliders. So the front first, everything loose, front comes down, get that tension in. Bear in mind I'm running away from the wind. I've got a rotating wing mast, the wind's behind me, the sail is like pretty much wrapped onto the leeward rigging on the starboard side, I think it was. And I'm pulling the sail down, I'm jumping up down the sliders, getting it all down. And as I get the tack set in and I start to bring on the halyard, I look up at the back edge of the sail, and it's all flapping and going crazy. It's like a machine gun going on. And then as I look up, I realize that the first crack of dawn, the first light that I'm starting to see out to the east, ahead of the boat, through the mainsail, I can see the sail and I can see there's a big rip in it, and I can see the light of the sun shining through the sail. And that's when I realized I had torn my mainsail. And as I watched, I can't do anything. The squall is still going on. I can't do much else apart from keep doing what I'm doing. As I watch, this rip goes 1 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot, and ends up reaching like mostly between my first and second reef. And as I get the last of it like tensioned in so that it's all flapping and obviously separated, but it's, you know, it's under tension now. It's not as crazy as it was. The sun just crests over the horizon. The squall drops, and I'm suddenly driving along in 15, 20 knots of breeze. The boat's flying, and there's a 6 foot rip in the back of the mainsail. And I am as far away from people as you can get. And I have got to say, I had not eaten properly for 24 hours. We've talked about this before. Super sleep deprived, way too much coffee and nicotine. And that was very hard. That was very hard. That's like, how exactly am I going to do this? So I sort of took stock. First thing always, get some food, get some sugar, get some water, make sure the oxygen's there. You know, if there's anything you can do to breathe, get some fluids, get some food inside you. It's immediately going to lift your spirits, and then deal with where you're at when those three have done, because oftentimes that will pick you up, you know. Came back on deck, so I'm going to have to do something with this. Like, if I shake out second reef, this thing's just going to be higher up. This is just going to rip the back of the mainsail right off. It was about 10 centimeters, no, maybe a bit more, maybe 15 or 20 centimeters of the back of the mainsail was separated from the mainsail, where it'd just been flapping so hard. So I realized, okay, what I'm going to have to do here, basically the gate's done. The gate's done, and this mainsail's going to have to come down, and everyone's flying, doing 300, 350 miles a day. Like, here we go again. I'm pooched. So mainsail down, and in the YouTube video here, I'll put a couple of images. I got the mainsail down. I got it spread out across the back of the boat. I've got this cockpit at the back of the boat, and the boom goes right to the back of the boat. It's a 30-foot long boom, and you've got this mainsail which pretty much goes square up the back of the boat. Now you're starting just like concertina that on the deck. The wind's still coming over the back of the boat, but now the boat is not in sequence with the waves. The waves are now going at 16, 17, 18 knots, and I'm now doing 10 knots. So these waves are just running up behind the boat and just washing over the back of the boat. I've got both headsails up, trying to pull as hard as I can, but there's nothing else I can do. Like, the wind is only what the wind is. The wind has come down a little bit, thank God. It's the water temperature is 5 degrees Celsius, which is like, what's that, like 38, 40 Fahrenheit. It's super cold. I'm super far from anywhere. I've got this massive rip in the back of the mainsail, and I'm still on my way to Cape Horn, which is where the wild things are meant to be. So I got down into the boat and had a look at the sail repair kit. And you know, the sail repair kit, when you've got an open 60, it's not like you've got bolts and bolts of fabric that you're going to be just getting out and like, oh, it's fine, you know. And even if I did have lots and lots of material, it'd probably be something that can go into a spinnaker or something, right? I'm not carrying around just yards and yards of sail material. So I look in the bag. It's the bag's all been put together by Mouse Sails, and in it, at the bottom, I find a 6 or 8 inch wide piece of Cuban fiber, which is literally two meters long. Like, literally exactly the length, 2.2 meters, or whatever it is. It's exactly the length of this rip plus what you need on the end, 4 or 5 inches on the end of it. And it's exactly the width to go across it and create exactly the repair that I need. And Cuban fiber, if you don't know that material, it's incredibly tough. Like, it's Dyneema threads, give or take, like felted together. Let's put it like that way. It's a threaded fabric. It's a laminated, stuck together, glued fabric. But the best way of describing Cuban fiber, which is the first way it was ever shown to me, is you're in the sail loft, you get a bradawl, you stab it through a piece of Cuban fiber, and you just pull on it with all your might, and it doesn't tear. This stuff is bulletproof. And even now, in the realm of 3DI and 3DL and all these things that have come up, 3DI is still a little step down or comparable to carbon fiber. Stuff is magic, crazy expensive, but magic. So suddenly, as I sit in the bottom of the boat, I've got this patch, and I think that's where emotionally I started to like tremble a little bit. I remember being very upset as I found this patch and realized, thank God I've got this, because literally otherwise there isn't anything else. What am I going to do? Like, I could get a jib. I know that Dee Kafari did that in the 2008 Vendée Globe when her mainsail started delaminate and fall apart. She got a jib and cut it up and made it out of that. But I don't have spare jibs. I only have the jibs I have. You know, there's no spares. There's no like anything else anywhere. Literally, I'd be like cutting up my waterproofs or something. So I found this, and emotionally, I knew like, man, I better have another cup of tea here. Like this is, I'm feeling pretty edgy. Got onto the deck and started looking at what I needed to do. And what I needed to do was firstly bring the two parts of the sail together so that there was no chance that the overall patch would end up lining up the sail incorrectly, so there'd be a pucker or a stress point. So first of all, I've got to do what I call like a football stitch, like the stitching you get on the front of an American football, just literally round and round and round and round and round and round and round, just to associate the pieces of fabric in the correct place, so I can place this very long, hard to handle piece of material and then start sewing it in place, knowing the sail's in the right shape. So there's going to be 6 foot of stitching there, and then I'm going to have to stitch 2 lines of stitching up one part of the mainsail and 2 lines of stitching up the other part of the mainsail. So everything is held together by these 2 lines of stitching. And then I'm going to have to put boxes on the end, which by the time I've gone round and round and crossed them is another like 6 foot, and down the bottom round and round and cross, and put all these boxes on. By the end of it, I realized there was the 6 foot of football stitching. There was 4 rows of 6 foot to go the length of the thing, and by the time I'd done all these boxes top and bottom to make sure it didn't rip out the ends, there was another 6 foot. So there was 6 times 6 feet of stitching to do, hand stitching, 36 foot, like I said, 12 meters of stitching, and I'm going to be doing it by hand with a sail needle and flat wax cotton. Luckily I had a lot of that on board, and a sailor's palm, and I got to tell you that when you're dealing with Dyneema Dacron mainsail, which is already 8 ounce in 2 fillets with a reinforcement on the back, so you're stitching through 24 ounces of sail material, and then you're going to put carbon fiber on top of that. Every time you have to punch through, you need to get the sail needle in your sailor's palm. The sailor's palm is a leather thing that wraps around the palm of your hand and has a little piece of metal like in the center, which has little holes drilled into it, so it really helps you locate the end of the needle, and then you can drive through using the whole pressure of your palm, drive this needle through. But at this kind of weight, you're at such a point where really you need to braddle the holes first and then push through, because otherwise it's putting so much force in that you actually break the back of the needle if you're at all incorrectly lined up. So you've got to braddle all the holes, and then you've got to drive all the holes through, and then the stitch that you're doing is like a herringbone stitch, because whilst you could just go up and down like a child might stitch something, I'm stitching on a patch which is going to be on an open 60 mainsail, which is going to go around Cape Horn. Now, for those who know, there is another way potentially of doing this, and that's to use the 291 deck hardware adhesive sealant, or 5200s, which would be a similar thing. However, I didn't have enough, basically, to put it blankly. There is a way of doing it when you've got laminate sails. This is not a full laminate sail. It's a Dacron Dyneema mix. It's got a warp and a weft, and it's actually a fabric. It doesn't work as well when you try and do the trick with 291 and basically glue things together. Plus, I have to say, it's just me. I only want to do this once. I'm heading to Cape Horn, which is still 2,000 miles away, whatever, and my instinct was stitching this together and doing this right. Now I've got this piece of material that I can use, this piece of carbon fiber. This is the only way to do it. So even though it's going to take however many hours, this is the better way of doing it. So yes, I'm aware of the 5200 trick and laminating things, but this was about, this has to not break again. So how many hours? Well, I sat there and I I got the patch and I tacked it on in the corners and a couple places, so it's kind of on the sail. Remember, it's still blowing 15, 20 knots. The waves are still washing over the back of the boat. I've got an immersion suit on, but I have to have my hands exposed. Water temperature very low, air temperature very low, miles from anywhere. I tack all this on and I look around at the up and down at the patch and I think, okay, 36 feet. Like, how fast can I stitch proper herringbone and braddle everything and in these conditions warm my hands? And I realized, like, realistically, it's going to take me an hour per foot. By the time you've had a little break, by the time you've had a cup of tea, by the time you've gone to the toilet, by the time you've warmed your hands, by the time you've slipped, if you're going to get realistic with it, and it's always better to be realistic in these situations rather than hopeful, realistically, this is going to take 36 hours. So, I'm now behind everybody. I've again broken the boat. I'm miles from anywhere, and I have not slept for 24 hours at least, and I have 36 hours of stitching ahead of me with water rolling over the back of the boat in the Southern Ocean, and the boat's rolling, pitching all over the place because it's just got headsails up. And this is what I write about in the book. And I just go on my knees, I put my hands on the floor, and I think, up until then, and even now in life, you know, I solve problems by going, what's the problem? Like, the very heart of the problem. What do we got? What do we need? What's all the steps we need to do to cure the problem? What's the first step of that sequence? Right, we have the problem, we have the things to hand, and we have the first step of a plan which is going to get us where we're going. It's very pragmatic. Don't for a second think I'm like not someone who procrastinates and everything else as well. But when the shit hits the fan and you need to get something done, that's how you do it. And I know how to do that. So you name your fear, you say what it is that's the worst case scenario, you work out a solution for that, and then you start working back all the steps to you in front of what you've got to do right now. And even though it's a terrible thing, you no longer need to think about the big overriding terrible issue. You don't have to think about the mountain. You just have to think about the step that's in front of you. And you just do that. Because if you, and look at it like going around the world, you can't go, I'm going to sail around the world. Oh, I'm sailing around the world. Today I'm in the middle of sailing around the world. Because there's so many parts of that if you actually keep thinking about like what you've got to do and where you've got to go, you'd never do it. You'd burn yourself out. You'd freak yourself out. You'd become a nervous wreck. And although I'd had my burnout moments previously, and I have always in life like fallen apart and got it back together again, if you go day to day thinking about the size of the enormity of what's going on, you ruin yourself. So you just think about the step in front. But sometimes, this is when I learned, some mountains are just so big that even the step in front is just too petrifying. Some tasks are so enormous that it sickens you to your stomach. All energy leaves you. You are just ripped apart by even just considering what's ahead of you. That is where depression starts to set in. That's where a feeling of helplessness starts to set in, where you just don't know even how to put one foot in front of the other. And I think that's what happened at this point. I can remember kneeling on the deck with all the sailing stuff. I think I still had the sailor's palm on my hands, putting both my hands on the floor and just going, I can't do this. Like, this is too much.